Okay, so we'll get started. Good afternoon to you all. You're all very welcome. Thank you very much for attending this webinar of the Institute for the Study of European Law at City Law School, City University of London. And my name is Elaine Fahy. I'm a professor at City Law School, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this event. It's a very topical time, and I hope that you really enjoy this. If you're watching this recording afterwards on YouTube, not having been at the event, we still welcome you very much, and it's wonderful to have you attending our events. At City Law School, we have a very vibrant Institute for the Study of European Law, and we're going to be holding a webinar in a few weeks' time on citizens' rights and the EU Settled Status Scheme, one of the schemes used under Brexit to protect residents' rights. We'll be looking at this on the 29th of March. We've also got a new event on the 20th of April on the EU as a global environmental regulator with speakers from the US and across the EU. And you can follow our events on the City Law School Twitter account to sign up for things and to keep in touch with all our activities. So without further ado, I'm really delighted to welcome you to this event this evening, not least because of its topicality, but because we've brought together a selection of very expert speakers who I think have a lot of very interesting things to say, and I hope that you enjoyed very much. And I'll start in alphabetical order to outline our speakers to you. We're going to start off with Dr. Davor Jancic, who is a senior lecturer at Queen Mary University of London Law School, and he does a lot of research over a many number of years on national parliaments, parliamentary diplomacy, parliaments beyond the nation state, and he has a fantastic book with OUP on national parliaments after the Lisbon Treaty. So Davor, it's lovely to see you, and thank you very much for doing this. We're also delighted to welcome back Claude Moraes, who was the Labour MEP for London between 1999 and 2020, and was the chair of the Libe Committee of the European Parliament for many years. And we were delighted to see that he received an OBE in the New Year's Honours list in 2020. And he's a long-term associate of City Law School. He comes to many City Law School events. He's spoken to many students and staff about a range of activities of the Libe Committee, about the European Parliament. So it's lovely to see you, Claude, and thank you very much for joining us and to speak to us today. We're very pleased to welcome Susanna Oberhauser, who's the head of the European Parliament Liaison Office in London, a brand new office in London. And she's been working in the service of the European Parliament for over 30 years as Director of Structural and Cohesion Policies and also as Director of Communications with Citizens. So it's wonderful to have you, Susanna, and thank you very much for your time. And last but not least, it's a great pleasure to welcome Lord Peter Ricketts, who is a crossbench life peer of the House of Lords and chair of the EU Justice and Security Committee. And prior to his parliamentary career, Lord Ricketts was the ambassador for the UK to France between 2012 and 2016, and also served as Britain's first national security advisor between 2010 and 2012. So I think you'll agree with me, we cannot have gathered a better group of individuals to reflect on this broader question of the webinar as to how to understand the post-Brexit parliamentary cooperation. So each speaker has no more than 10 minutes to speak. I'm going to give them a provocative wave at about 9 minutes. And we'd like to invite you to submit your questions to the chat box in the questions and answers at any point. And we're looking forward to having a discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor to Davor. And thank you very much for joining us once again. And we hope that you enjoy the conversation. So Davor, over to you.
Elaine, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be a part of this panel, such a distinguished panel at that. Okay, so I will try to kind of condense my comments within 9 minutes. I don't think I will succeed, so if there's anything left over, I'll try to do it in the Q&A. Okay, so what I would like to cover concerning parliamentary cooperation and parliamentary involvement in the post-Brexit era is really situated at the national level of the UK, at the bilateral level between the UK and the EU, and the global level. I don't know if I'll manage to cover all, I'll try. Okay, so the UK national perspective, I want to point out actually only two things. And one is that really the main goal of Brexit was to take back control, to regain sovereignty, to reinstate the supremacy of Parliament so that all possible legislation can be adopted without any fetters. Yes. However, I think one way to observe this is through the requirements of regulatory alignment, which are present both in the withdrawal agreement, specifically concerning Northern Ireland, but also in the TCA. And I'm referring here specifically to the provisions in the Trading Cooperation Agreement, which concern the possibility of one party to invoke unilateral measures against the other party when there is a significant divergence from the level playing field thresholds that have been agreed, where such significant divergences cause a manifest impact on trade and investment, right? So each party has the right unilaterally to take measures when there are these significant excessive divergences in regulations. So some of these regulations are adopted by non-legislative bodies, but the framework for regulation and legislation is the province of the Parliament. So the extent to which the UK Parliament will be able to fully exercise its sovereignty and legislative supremacy will, at least partially to some extent and indirectly, depend on the use, or at least the possibility to use this mechanism. And we don't know at this point whether this mechanism will prove to be an important one or whether it will just be a theoretical possibility. However, we already have indications, and this is what I wanted to point out. We already have indications of the approach of both the EU and the UK to using such unilateral measures. And this event is a fantastic event organized at a very important period in time, because we have so many different developments, both in Parliament and outside Parliament, which have a bearing on interparliamentary cooperation. So one example of the use of such unilateral measures is, for instance, the UK's wish to extend the grace period on the checks between the great British goods going into Northern Ireland. Yeah. So another one was the unilateral violation of the withdrawal agreement, which was present in the UK Internal Market Bill, which was later removed in the UK Internal Market Act. On the EU side, we have the unilateral invocation of Article 16 of the Protocol on Northern Ireland concerning the availability of the vaccines. COVID vaccines, yes. So there are already indications that whatever measures exist, both sides are likely to act in order to enforce what they perceive are their rights. And this could act as a constraint to the extent to which a legislative sovereignty could be regained or fully used. Now, the second aspect, other than regulatory alignment, is really the reform of scrutiny at the UK level. Yes, so here it's really important to consider how the internal bodies dealing with EU affairs will be restructured, and we already have a member of the House of Lords, so I will leave the discussion of that to Lord Ricketts. But in the House of Commons, the Future Relationship Committee has ceased operation. Currently, the European Scrutiny Committee of the House of Commons is still continuing in operation, and if I remember correctly, it will continue operating until the end of April, after which there should be a new decision as to the reorganization of scrutiny concerning EU affairs. The new definition of EU affairs really concerns mainly the implementation of the withdrawal agreement and the implementation and potentially future amendment of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Another important aspect here, I believe, is the inclusion of the devolved legislatures in the work of Westminster, not only concerning EU affairs, which I think is really important, but also outside EU affairs concerning international agreements that don't necessarily concern the European Union. I'm happy to expand on things later. What will be important here is to ensure the continued access to information, early access to information concerning EU law that may have an impact on UK law, and also to establish mechanisms to monitor and scrutinize UK law that may have an impact on EU law. So the mutual legislative and regulatory impacts will be important to look at, not least because of the mechanisms that I've already outlined at the beginning. Okay, I want to move on then to the EU level. Here, obviously, we all know the governing structures. So we have the Partnership Council, and there are provisions which enable the creation of the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. the problem with these bodies is that the Partnership Council which is not uncharacteristic for international agreements, it exercises really quite far-reaching powers. So it has the power to adopt decisions, not only implementing the agreement, but also amending it and potentially supplementing with new agreements. And that clearly attracts the need for parliamentary engagement and scrutiny. And here it is particularly important to note that there are, at least in my counting, 19 specialized committees and also 4 working groups that operate under it. By comparison, CETA has only 9 specialized committees. Obviously, it depends on the depth of the relationship between the UK and the EU and between the EU and Canada. But it really is a very intricate network of committees that have been created. One of the problems that has been indicated probably across the board, across both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, was the issue of transparency, whereby the UK government and the representatives of the European Commission have not always were not always willing to share information in advance to the UK Parliament, which has prevented Parliament from pronouncing on the matters at hand. And this can then lead to tensions and political conflicts, which is a disadvantage. So really what this means is really that a lot of decisions that concern the relationship between the UK and the EU have moved to the transnational forum. So they have not necessarily moved from Brussels back to London, but they have moved elsewhere. So that's why we need to ensure that parliamentary participation is in place in order to ensure that. Now, I know that some other speakers are going to talk about the Assembly as well, but I wanted to only point out a few things, and I will leave the rest for others to address, and that is that other than scrutinizing, obviously, the work of the Assembly and considering its role, access to information, the possibility to request information and the right to receive information and the possibility to provide recommendations to the Partnership Council, I think it's also important for the UK Parliament to think about other avenues of influence that it could potentially informally and indirectly exercise concerning EU affairs. And that refers to presence in Brussels through its parliamentary representatives, a national parliamentary office. That's one way. Another way could be through participation in COSAC, which is a conference of the European Parliament and national committees for European affairs. Obviously, the formal status is no longer available. However, there is a possibility for the UK to participate as an observer, as a non-voting member when the agenda is relevant to the UK and when there's a joint interest for this to happen. However, importantly, I would also emphasize that it would be a good idea for the UK Parliament also to look into developing bilateral parliamentary relationships with the parliaments of some of the member states. All the existing EU member states already practice this, and this isn't always visible, but France and Germany have occasional meetings between the Assemblée Nationale and the Bundestag. So those are the kinds of relationships that can add value for post-Brexit UK. And this is what I wanted to kind of complement to the discussion that I'm sure others will cover. And I don't know how much time I have, but I just wanted to highlight another thing, and very briefly, and that is the global level. So other than the EU relationship, I think Brexit has also highlighted the importance of Parliament's engagement with the wider world. And so if one wants to discount Global Britain as an empty slogan, that's possible, but if one wants to, it can also be observed as having substance in the sense that Parliament is now presented with a new challenge of organizing treaty scrutiny and the way procedures can be built on the CREGA procedures, which have been assessed as unsatisfactory by both houses of the UK Parliament. And if you permit me, I'll give one example where the UK parliamentary diplomacy is particularly important, and it actually stems from something that has recently happened in the House of Lords, and that concerns the trade bill. and the trade bill has been defeated in the House of Lords for the second time now because of a number of amendments adopted. And one of them concerns the possibility for Parliament to delay the process of concluding trade agreements with countries where there was a determination by the High Court of the existence of genocide. So now this is a matter of the legislative procedure. We don't know whether the House of Commons will agree. They didn't in the first round, but we'll see what happens. But the reason why that's important for parliamentary diplomacy is because this amendment stems from British participation in the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance for China. And members of the European Parliament are also members of that alliance. So there are broader avenues for parliamentary participation and influence than just at the UK level and at the European level. And with that, I would like to end. Thank you.
Super, thank you so much, Davor, and perfectly on time as well. And I'd just like to point out that Davor has a fantastic blog post on everything that he's just written. I think on the Queen Mary website, perhaps you can circulate it all. But thank you very much, Davor. That was fantastic. I'm going to hand over immediately to Claude. Claude, over to you.
Thank you very much, Elaine, and thank you, colleagues. I'm going to give an approach as having being an MEP in the interparliamentary process, but also a British MEP, so having given evidence to UK select committees. So coming from that perspective and then seeing how this new governing ecosystem has been set up. It hasn't really fully been set up. Davor is one of the people giving evidence to this committee, and of course it's in the process of being set up. But I want to give a perspective on what I see, and what I see will be the challenges of the new Partnership Council and the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. Quite difficult ones to say, and I'm sure they'll become household names in time, but they're not at the moment. The most important thing I think to say, and where I want to start, is with the Partnership Council. I think if we go away from today with one very important point, I think it's to really emphasise that the Partnership Council has been a real move where the executive has taken power. So when we talk about taking control, or whatever that meant, the executive has taken control, the Commission in the European Union, and of course, government ministers in the United Kingdom. This Partnership Council is powerful, and it was set up under Article 217, the association agreement, so which I'm painfully familiar in the job I've done over many years. And what it essentially does is it gives the chance over time for the Partnership Council to change our relationship over time, either to diverge or to move our relationship in a particular way. And if we look at that perspective, what that means essentially is that the scrutiny arrangements, on the one hand, which Davor was talking about, and which my other two colleagues will talk about, become so important. On the one hand, the UK parliamentary scrutiny arrangements, and of course, on the other hand, the European parliamentary arrangements. So I want to just mention them and then talk about the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly and how that should develop and look, given how powerful the Partnership Council is going to be. Now, the scrutiny arrangements for the UK Parliament. Now, a lot of evidence was given recently as the, I think they called it the Brexit Committee or the Committee on the Future of Europe. There's just so many different words for these things, but as the committee was being wound up, essentially, as Peter, I'm sure, will give a good detailed explanation, a new Europe committee will be set up to replace the liaison committee, the European Scrutiny Committee, and the Procedure Select Committee, and all of what these committees do. And what I would say about this is that it's not clear to me how precise those arrangements yet are to meet the challenge of what will be the scrutiny task. Now, Peter, I'm sure, will talk more about this. From what I've seen giving evidence over many years to the UK parliamentary authorities, I would say, and to UK Parliament, I would say that it's very important that the experts who gave evidence recently are listened to, and that what we've seen with the House of Lords, for example, where you have a very thoughtful process, lots of detail in terms of the scrutiny, which I'm not sure was always matched in the House of Commons for various reasons, which we can go into in the discussion, needs to be really upgraded. So I think the UK scrutiny arrangements are wanting, and I think that's one issue. On the European parliamentary side, and I know Suzanne will talk more about this, but on the European parliamentary side, I think the European Parliament, as the co-decision partner, co-legislator, will take very seriously its view of what the Commission does on the Partnership Council. And I'll leave it there because I think Suzanne will talk more about this, but I think that's very critical because anyone who underestimates the Parliament should look at today's news and really understand that they will take action and they will take their co-legislative powers very seriously. They're not a talking shop. They will use their powers. And of course, because of the Brexit steering group and the way that that has developed and the way that the Parliament has had quite a big role in the withdrawal agreement, that is taken, I think, as a guarantee that they will have that scrutiny role or want that scrutiny role of the Partnership Council. Then I would go on to say that if we go on to the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, what I would say about this is that we are in a situation now, and Davor has implied this, where you have a member state who is now essentially lobbying Brussels and lobbying the European Union. Now, I hate to say it in that way because it makes me feel quite depressed, having been a member of the European Parliament for so many years, and where we made decisions, we were part of the European Union. But essentially, this is what we are going to be doing. Now, that makes the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, I'll get used to saying it, seem fairly weak, but that would belie what it can become and what it should become. And again, Davor hinted at this, but I want to go a bit more deeply into what it should become. Because the people who will attend this, both MPs and MEPs and members of the House of Lords, because it will be, according to the way it's being developed, both MPs and members of the House of Lords and MEPs, those people will be individuals who are providing scrutiny in their own domestic parliament, so on the UK side and in the European Union. So they will be experts, they will know what they're doing. So they will not be engaged in kind of visits to Brussels or visits to London. They will be interested in exactly what the Partnership Council is doing, the decisions they're making, whether it's the Northern Ireland Protocol, whether it's the decisions on, the equivalence decisions which are coming up in the City of London, whether it's the decision that was just made on adequacy, which I think is going to be troublesome, that was made in the last few days. All of these very difficult decisions are decisions that the future Parliamentary Partnership Assembly will need to be interested in. Now, Davor mentioned COSAC as a model. There will be other models. For example, Norway has engaged very intensely in ways of dealing with the EU, and COSAC is one way. Another very good example I would give is the JSPG, the Joint Joint Parliamentary Scrutiny Group on Europol. And I want to give this as a very good example because JHA issues and security issues, data issues, will be another one of the many constant themes in the coming months. Now, the JSPG was something that I chaired over a couple of years, and what I noticed was a really intense interest by member state parliaments, by members of parliament, and also by European members of parliament. But the most important thing about the JSPG as an example of interparliamentary activity, and is a very good model for the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly working well, is that it got respect, it gave decisions on the budget of Europol, one of the most popular EU agencies, but it also delved into the data elements of what Europol was doing, the security elements of what Europol was doing, and it dealt with constitutional issues, for example, the notorious Danish referendum on the opt-out on Europol. Now, what it said on those things jointly with members of parliament from different member states, from MEPs, all of whom were sort of expert in this issue, and with the Commission, was listened to, and those decisions were made. And I wanted to give that example to show that within this structure, the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly needn't be a kind of attachment. And I've seen the diagrams. I think the diagram presented to most of the committees was done by the Tony Blair Institute, and it sticks it up in the corner, sometimes with a kind of dotted line around it, as if it's not going to be much of a thing. Well, it has to be something, and it has to work. And I'm certain, having been in the European Parliament, those parliamentarians will want to make it work. But it's incredibly important that both sides make it work. It's critical because the Partnership Council will be so powerful, and it's critical because there are many models to make it work. And I'll just add that this is not an either or. And Suzanne will say more about the National Parliament Office and the other elements that will be in place to add to this. But other countries, including Norway, have ensured that they're present at presidencies and all the rest of it. But I want to end on this point. My 10 minutes are up, so I just want to end on this point where Davor ended, to provide some symmetry. If the United Kingdom has just left its most important alliance and its most important partnership and wants to be a global player, then one of the most important things it has to do is establish trust in international agreements and international partnerships. What it did today, of course, would send a signal to countries like the United States that a country like Ireland wants to take legal action. Now, that may seem trivial today, but it's about building trust. It's about building trust through scrutiny, through parliamentary partnerships. The evidence is that good parliamentary partnerships create good scrutiny, create good trust. And I think that's why it's worth working towards making this Parliamentary Partnership Assembly work, and to take it seriously, and to not make it a talking shop, and to make it work, to scrutinise the Partnership Council.
Super, thank you so much, Claude. That was fantastic, really interesting stuff. That's wonderful. And could I just ask anyone in the audience who'd like to ask a question, you can please start to put your questions into the questions and answers box. And I think there's some coming in already, so it'd be lovely to hear from you. There's so many experts I can see in the audience, obviously with lots of good questions to add to our discussions. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Susanna. Susanna, over to you.
Hello, thank you very much, and I'm also very pleased to be on this very distinguished panel. I can really just continue where Claude left off. I think if the last 24 hours have shown anything, is that the implementation of both the withdrawal agreement and the TCA that form the basis for the future relationship between the EU and the UK, if that has shown anything, is that it both require close oversight and scrutiny, and one, I'm sure that parliamentary involvement in that oversight is a good thing and can only be beneficial for that functioning. Perhaps just a word to myself. I'm heading the European Parliament office in London. The office is very much committed to support the interparliamentary relations between the UK Parliament, the parliaments of the parliaments and Assembly of the Devolved Nations, and the European Parliament. But we will also continue with outreach activities, educational activities, cultural diplomacy events, and so on. So I would like, for my intervention would be actually, first of all, I would like to talk about the European Parliament and the powers it has in scrutinizing the TCA. Also, it's the requests it has made towards the Commission in order to allow it to grant its consent vote. And in the second part, I would like to focus on what can jointly be done between the two parliaments through the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. So as we heard, this assembly doesn't exist yet, so I will give a couple of examples for existing arrangements that the European Parliament has within other cooperation agreements. So a lot has been mentioned about the governments of the TCA and the complex nature and the far-reaching powers of the Council. I don't need to say anything more about that. The TCA also provides for the partnership assembly, for the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. It doesn't prescribe it, so it is very open in what it should be and what it might be. And it also, I think it's important to underline that the parliaments of the two contracting parties, i.e. the UK and the European Union, they don't have a direct role in that structure to hold the Partnership Council accountable. And I think that is important when we look then into what the Partnership Assembly should do, it could do. So the European Parliament's involvement at the level of the EU, that means vis-a-vis the European Commission, is that the treaty provides in its Article 218 that the Parliament is at all stages to be immediately and fully informed of the procedure. This is a prerogative from the treaty, and the Commission is also fully committed in fulfilling this. Just as an example, we had today in the group of members who deal with the future relationship, we had Vice President Šefčovič reporting from the call that he had last night with Lord Frost. So there is really a direct, immediate exchange and information. The Council has also foreseen in its decision on the conclusion of the TCA that the Parliament needs to be put into a position to fully exercise its powers and should be informed of measures, the unilateral measures and other issues, and receive reports. So recently, the European Parliament's committee have obviously very closely looked at the TCA and have looked at what is provided, and there is really a recurrent concern, and that is that the democratic scrutiny of the decisions taken by the Partnership Council. And there the EP insists very much that these prerogatives are respected in order to be able to play a full role in the monitoring and implementation of the agreement. And the European Parliament is in the process of making requests towards the Commission, and they concern mainly enhanced information rights, consultation rights, participation rights, role in appointment of arbiters. It's a long list that has been put to the Commission, on which the Commission has committed to start working with the European Parliament, make a statement, where the European Parliament is also seeking that those commitments will be then translated into robust commitments in a written form, one way or the other. It was originally foreseen that this would sort of come together for the when the European Parliament will grant its consent vote. Now, we've learned today that the decision on that date has not yet been taken, so there is still fluidity in the process. So my second part now is the joint parliamentary scrutiny that can and should be exercised through the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. As we've said, it is the agreement provides that it may be established. So therefore, very much is actually remains with the discretion and the willingness of the legislatures on both sides to see what they make out of this. The process of exchange between the two parliaments has started. There was an initial exchange of letters between the President of the European Parliament and the Speaker and the Lord Speaker to launch that process. The formal remit tasks that are also in the agreement is that the Assembly can request information from the Partnership Council, be informed of decisions and recommendations, and to make also recommendations to that council. And these powers really mirror very largely common features that are that other interparliamentary committees that the European Parliament has under different setups have. So I don't think I can go into details of all these, but I think sort of their common features really is that they are joint bodies and that they are established under bilateral agreements between the EU and that partner country, and that they typically reflect the ambitions to engage in a close partnership. And typically they would cover countries, neighborhood countries, countries that are candidates for accession. So, and would not be in a pure trade agreement as with CETA or Japan. And the meetings are fairly on a regular basis. They are formal, there are rules of procedures, there can be subcommittees. So it is a fairly elaborate structure. Okay, so as I said, the European Parliament has got also in its preparation and in the resolution that it will adopt or is planning to adopt to accompany the consent vote. It is committed that this assembly should be tasked with the monitoring and of the full and proper implementation of that agreement. In particular, as we heard, that this is because this is a very dynamic agreement and with lots of power of the PCA, and it can furthermore also provide a forum for legislative dialogue to make recommendations to the Partnership Council on areas, policies areas where one should have enhanced and improved cooperation, and to generally promote close relations. The European Parliament might also wish that this assembly would cover the withdrawal agreement. So therefore my main message actually with which I would want to leave you here is that this PPA is actually the only structure that can provide for a direct scrutiny of the Partnership Council as a whole. And it, as it mentioned before by Claude, it has got great potential, but very, very much depends on that it will be provided with the tools necessary to effectively fulfill this role. And therefore the future, these decisions and the importance of the decisions on its composition, its powers, the structure, the competences, mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much.
Super, thank you so much, Suzanne. That was extremely informative, a lot of very important detail. Thank you very much for taking us through that. And now, without further ado, I hand over to Peter. Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Elaine. And I found that already a very fascinating discussion with our expert panel. And right at the start, let me say as well that I think the events of the last 2 days and what the British government have now done unilaterally on the protocol just underline the importance of close and strong interparliamentary contacts and debate and scrutiny as a partial way of helping to make up the gap in trust and confidence that I fear is a growing gap between the British government and the EU as a result of these unilateral measures, which I personally think are extremely ill-judged, rather than using the complex consultation machinery that is there in the TCA. So from my standpoint as a parliamentarian and a member of the family of EU committees in the Lords, I thought I'd just start with a little advertisement for what is coming over the next few weeks from the Lords. We are engaged on a series of reports that have to be completed by 31 March. all of them will be forward-looking, analytical, taking the TCA, examining, making conclusions on the strengths and weaknesses of individual parts of it, and in particular highlighting uncertainties and issues that will need to be considered as we see how all this works out and is implemented in the months ahead. Each of the committees have been holding short inquiries and taking evidence, and as I say, they will be published in the week before 31 March. I hope they'll be a valuable resource for commentators, researchers, and students of EU affairs, because they will each be quite detailed and considered pieces of work. For example, the main European Committee will be looking at the governance of the TCA and the issues that arise from that. Each of the others will be doing specialized reports in their own areas. In my own case, the subcommittee I chair, Justice and Security, is conducting an inquiry into post-Brexit UK-EU security cooperation. And what we'll be looking at there is to what extent the government has succeeded in maintaining effective access to the various instruments and agencies of cooperation on justice and security, where the shortfalls are, and the areas that we believe will need further scrutiny by successor committees. And I say successor committees because on the 31st of March, all the EU committees in the Lords disappear at midnight like Cinderella's coach, and are replaced by a new structure. And as I think Claude has already said, there will be a European Affairs Committee, which will take the lead on scrutiny of the Parliamentary Council. I'm sure participation in the PPA, the Parliamentary Assembly, and oversight of the impact of the TCA as well on UK overseas territories, for example, Gibraltar, as it negotiates its new agreement with the EU, and the Crown dependencies, not to be forgotten, like Jersey and Guernsey. That will, I'm sure, be one of the areas that will deal with the issue of liaison with the devolved assemblies in the UK on scrutiny of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. That European Affairs Committee will have one subcommittee, which will be on the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that will do what we have been used to doing, the classic sort of scrutiny of EU documents and their impact on the UK, because, of course, there will continue to be EU decisions that will have an impact on Northern Ireland as a result of the protocol. And I would expect that protocol subcommittee to be heavily engaged in that, as well as in liaison with the devolved assembly in Belfast and the business community, as we have been doing in the EU committee up to now. Another of the former EU subcommittees has already been spun off as an international agreements committee chaired by Lord Goldsmith, and they will be taking the lead on scrutiny of the free trade agreements that we are promised and that have been coming through mainly in the form of rollover agreements so far. The subcommittee that I've been chairing will be replaced by a new Justice and Home Affairs Committee, which will not simply be looking at EU-UK relations, but JHA issues more widely. But I assume that, among other things, it will scrutinize the implementation of Title III of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and in particular the work of the Specialized Committee on Law Enforcement and Judicial Cooperation. I think it will also need to pick up issues that are very relevant to UK-EU relations, but are not covered in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, like asylum and migration, like private and family law, which is, of course, of importance to many UK citizens. And we can talk further in questions if people are interested about the substance of the TCA in the area of justice and security. But I must say, I've been very struck in digging into the complex detail of the TCA at how much is actually still left to be worked out, negotiated, and settled. There are many, many areas. In some areas, for example, the access to databases, like the PRUM database, it is subject to evaluation later in the year by the EU side. On PNR, there are very complex derogations from the normal obligation to delete PNR data very quickly. And, and on data more generally, the UK will be held to a higher standard as a third country, and adequacy, data adequacy decisions by the EU are an ongoing thing. They are not a one-off thing. And we've already seen from some of the judgments we've had, like the Schrems judgment, how sensitive issues of data and national security are. So there's a lot there that will need continuing scrutiny. Last point, there is real enthusiasm in the House of Lords for interparliamentary cooperation and for the prospects of the Partnership Assembly. Quite how the UK Parliament organises itself, I think, is still to be seen. We need to await the creation of a Commons equivalent to Lord Kinnoul's European Affairs Committee. But clearly that's going to be vital in parliamentary oversight of the Partnership Council, as Claude and others have made clear. We are also very keen in the Lords to continue the other channels of cooperation that exist, like COSAC, like, as Claude mentioned, the interparliamentary conferences on Europol, also on Eurojust. I think there's a meeting going on even today on CFSP and CSDP, which the House of Lords is participating in. They are all important in maintaining the web of cooperation as we move to becoming more accustomed to the idea that the UK is now a third country. Last point, we should also not lose sight of the bilateral parliamentary links. In the House of Lords, we've maintained a very close relationship with the upper house of the Irish Parliament, also with the French Senate, and we would like to develop further relations with the Bundesrat, for example, and other European upper chambers. I think bilateral parliamentary links, getting parliamentarians, especially new elected parliamentarians, used to dealing with EU counterparts, is going to be increasingly vital now that we don't have access to the established EU-wide mechanisms. Enough from me, Elaine, back to you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Peter. That was a very helpful, very useful exposition of all of the changes about to take effect very shortly and the institutional parameters of how we think of these issues. So thank you very much for that, Peter. And the questions are already coming in. There's lots of them and also to the chat. So please continue to put your questions into the Q&A box. We'd love to hear from you. And there's so many people with such a wealth of expertise. And there's also, I think, lots of students from our Law of Brexit course as well. So it's wonderful to have you all. I'll start off with the first question there in the chat box is from David Finamore. He says, given the political sensitivities around the legal substance of the protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, how might parliamentary scrutiny of the protocol be best managed through the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly established by the TCA, which makes no reference to the protocol, or through the establishment of a dedicated mechanism that reflects the differentiated treatment of Northern Ireland under the protocol? So it didn't take long that we got to the substance of the meat. Who would like to go first? Can I start? Yeah, Davor, shall I go back in the same order? Okay, Davor. Davor, you're just on mute.
Thanks, Elaine. There's one point I wanted to make even earlier on this, and I think it concerns membership. So the Trading Cooperation Agreement does not prescribe membership. So membership of the delegations that go into the Assembly is not decided by the trade deal or by the government or by the European Parliament on the UK side. So on the UK side, it's up to the UK Parliament to decide. And I think this is a great opportunity to incorporate members of the devolved legislatures in those delegations, to give them a voice and an opportunity precisely to pronounce on the issues that may concern the Northern Ireland Protocol. And there was also like kind of a sense that about the uncertainty as to how these questions might be addressed. And I wanted to also say that I think some of the tensions that we've seen surrounding the protocol actually stem partly from the lack of dialogue, which has then disabled a reflection on the different opportunities to act. And so parliaments really have a role in that. And the assembly that's foreseen in the deal, in the TCA, is really of a deliberative, discursive character. So that's what its nature is. It doesn't have the powers of democratic control and accountability. But that doesn't mean that it's less valuable. And that's because advanced communication and consultation about the plans of diplomatic action, political action, legislative action, regulatory action can actually help to calibrate different avenues of action on either side. And I think by doing that, some of the frictions and tensions could be reduced and a compromise could be found before there is a need to act unilaterally and then create a problem. So I think that would be one way to enrich the work of the Assembly.
Super, thanks so much, Davor. Claude, would you have anything to say on this point, this question?
I think just to add, I mean, I had intended to mention the devolved assemblies as well. And Suzanne mentioned, and I think this is the case in the Parliament side, that obviously with COVID going on and all the other priorities happening, there hasn't been much activity in setting this thing up. But I think it is fairly open to appoint people to it, which thankfully will involve good experts from the Lords, thankfully, rather than, you know, sometimes with what happened in the Commons, it wasn't so good. But the devolved assemblies I think that will happen. And I think the point I was trying to make in my contribution that was a bit laboured was that the way that it can be constructed, there are some good models for ensuring that, for example, the protocol could be discussed in a way that you have experts in the PPA that will be respected, because there are no real powers in the PPA. So it's going to have a kind of respect, and it's going to have some rules to ensure that happens. But the devolution thing is going to be important for the protocol. And the other thing about the protocol is that, of course, the scrutiny is going to have to happen at the UK side in the way that Peter mentioned really well, so that the Partnership Assembly doesn't get its own way, as just happened. Sorry to be so blunt, but you know, without any checks or balances at all.
Thanks very much, Claude. Susanna.
Yeah, thank you. On the question of should the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly also cover the withdrawal agreement, I think from the European Parliament there is a feeling that it would indeed be good. So that is definitely something that would be supported there. And then if I could sort of on a more personal level add, and that does not represent the Parliament, I think that with the inclusion of those people who are more directly concerned, and if we talk about the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol, obviously members from the devolved assembly there, that this is something that can perhaps avoid that kind of issues that we are now finding ourselves in, and that it's actually always good to have those people who are most concerned with actually would have a place there. There were two other questions. Shall I reply to them now, or do you want to go another?
I'll go through just in order that I'll go through those ones. So thank you, Susanna. Peter.
Well, I think the short answer is I think there is no position yet on the British Parliament side, partly, as I said, because we're still waiting for the Commons to constitute its own new committee to succeed the Hilary Benn committee. And then there are a whole series of things that will need to be thought about, not least size of delegations, ways of working, involvement of devolved assemblies. And as the questioner says, should this Parliamentary Assembly also cover the withdrawal agreement? There is, of course, no provision in the withdrawal agreement for joint parliamentary oversight. The leadership of the of the Partnership Council and the Joint Committee will be the same, I guess. Certainly on the British side, it will be Lord Frost in both cases, and they're bound to overlap in agendas. So personally, I can see there would be advantage, but we have not yet worked out a position on the UK side yet.
That's great. Thank you very much, Peter. So we have a good few questions. Just to be a bit more efficient, I won't ask everyone to comment on each question, but the first question there in the Q&A box is from Francis Jacobs. And they say, besides the more formal meetings of the Partnership Assembly, another potentially linkage mechanism could be through the European political parties, the Labour Party and the SDLP within the Party of European Socialists, the Liberal Democrats and the Alliance Party through Renew Europe, and the Greens through the European Greens and the SNP, and played through the European Free Alliance. Only the Conservatives seem less well linked. What is the potential of such contacts? Did anyone want to come in on that? Does that interest, maybe Claude, would that be of interest to you possibly? Or
it's a complicated one. I would just say, you mentioned about the Conservatives, but it was the EPP were very keen, Suzanne probably backed me up on this, initially to set up the PPA, and there was more scepticism in the Parliament generally in 2019. So, you know, for the broad-based political groups, and political parties, European political parties, I mean, there may be some scope in the future. And I would say that you have to think about the future for this, because this TCA, I mean, it's not just for now, it's going to, you know, it's forever, unfortunately. I mean, it's going to go on. And so there may be a development, and also the way that it's been done under Article 217, it's going to change. So political parties, of course, I mean, there's lots of scope there. You know, so I won't say any more.
Great, thank you, Claude. And there's a question from Claudina Richards. Dr. Janczyk mentioned the need to include the devolved legislators in the scrutiny process. Which could you elaborate on further in the Q&A? It would be interesting to hear his views on this. Davor, would you like to say anything further?
Yes, sure. I think one way to observe this is that already there is a trend, that we already have a trend for which speaks about the inclusion of the devolved legislatures in the work of Westminster concerning non-UK affairs going beyond the UK. That's both the EU and I would argue also international agreements that don't necessarily concern the EU. And that is the Interparliamentary Forum on Brexit, which operated for 2 years. So we already have a version of a template that could be used to create a forum for dialogue, at least some platform where parliamentarians will be able to liaise and discuss the implications of the UK's affairs with the European Union for the devolved level. And in fact, the House of Commons Future Relationship Committee, in its final report, already suggested that this Interparliamentary Forum on Brexit could be reconfigured for this purpose, which I think is an important development. So it wouldn't be called Interparliamentary Forum on Brexit, because Brexit is, well, done, at least in some way, even though it is a beginning in another way. But there is a template which can serve as a basis on which to develop this, and I think this is a very positive development.
Super, great. Thanks, Davor. We have a question from David Natzler. Having been part of discussions before the UK left the EU, I'm delighted that we have something beyond an association agreement, and that a PPA can be whatever it wants, which must be determined by the two parliaments and not the executives and their officials. The PPA must also be accountable in a way that COSEC never was, nor the Europol body. And they also have another question, if I might be able to just put them together just for the sake of efficiency. Can Susanna give reassurance that the UK's National Parliament Office will have protected status and access to the EP? And can some use be made of the expertise of former UK's MEPs in providing liaison with the EP? Well, I'll start maybe, Susanna, with the second part, and you can have a think about the first part, Susanna.
Yeah, thank you. Well, indeed, the representatives both of the House of Commons and House of Lords will have their continued status in the European Parliament with the facilities that they had before, that was granted by our Secretary General. We have also, we as an office in London have started to sort of create our an ambassador program in the form of former members like Claude, who we want to involve in our outreach activities, and we very much want to keep them you know, to keep them occupied in the future. just one word on the second question about the what the powers and the structure of the assembly. At least from the side of the European Parliament, there I can assure you that this is very much an issue that will be discussed by the Parliament, by the leadership of the Parliament, the political groups, but by nobody else. So on our side, that is definitely the case.
Great, thank you, Susanna. And just on that other question on accountability and the PPA, and does anyone have any thoughts on this, on the idea of I think it's a well put question to some extent about how how to understand the broader parameters of it relative to other bodies. Any particular feelings, the setup, the institutional design, the structure on generally. Was that a hand, Davor and Peter? Maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Let's start. Yeah.
Davor, then Peter.
Okay, I can start, no problem. So basically, one way in which accountability of parliamentarians for the transnational work can be ensured is through openness and transparency. I think that's a really important question that the member of the audience raised, and I think the particular reason why this is important is because very often, all too often, I think actually, parliamentarians' participation in international work has been kind of dismissed, at least to some extent, as kind of parliamentary tourism, where there is no follow-up. And I think that question, precisely addresses that parliaments should actually report afterwards and create summaries of the discussions and try to inform the wider audience, and so that the debate that happens at the assembly can be transmitted to the wider society, so that for the purpose of the creation of the public opinion on the matters discussed. I think that's really important, and the political parties will also have a role in ensuring this. So yeah, I think reporting matters. So it's not only parliamentarians taking other institutions to account, but also they should have a responsibility as well.
Thanks, Davor. And anyone else who wants to jump in, just maybe, is it Claude, I think, Peter? So Peter, oh yeah, Peter. And then...
Well, just to add to that, really, clearly, this, as somebody said, the PPA is to be formed, it's to be developed, and it's up to parliamentarians to take it in the way they wish. Certainly on the British side, the government has said it's very much up to Parliament to take and run with this PPA proposal and make something of it. I think there are two dimensions to the question. One is sort of public transparency and public profile, and that is up to the parliamentarians to make sure they can report in ways that attract public attention. The other is accountability back to parliaments. And there, I think the Lords, certainly, I'm sure the Lords European Affairs Committee will want to hear from and use and integrate reports from the delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly in Lords' work. I don't know how it will be in the Commons. I suppose it's fair to say that the Commons has probably taken less interest in inter-parliamentary dialogue and the results of it than the Lords has in the past. So I think it's up to parliamentarians to make the most of it and to use the committee structures in the two houses and debates in the two houses to feed back on what happens in the PPA and make it become an important part of this structure of continued cooperation between Britain and the EU. It's all to play for, but I think there's plenty that can be done there.
Super, thank you, Peter. Claude or Susanna, did you want to comment there?
Just mention something quickly. Just Susanne, did you want to go first? No, I just wanted to mention very quickly, Elaine, just the issue of soft power in the PPA, which Peter kind of alluded to just now. The way in which the PPA is structured, there'll have to be some innovative ways to do it, and soft power is quite important, meaning it'll have to make itself heard, it'll have to look important, because the rules suggest that there won't be the normal kind of scrutiny, accountability structures there, and somebody just put a question saying why, how will it was to me saying how will it not be a talking shop, and that would be the danger, and I think it can escape that danger by looking at the various models that are there. When I mentioned the Europol JPSG one, there was a reason for mentioning that, and the reason was that that security at the time that Europol and Eurojust and other agencies like that were in the headlines was seen as a success story of the EU. Now, I won't go into that, but it was just seen as a success story. Europol was seen as the most successful and attractive agency. Now, all member states' parliamentarians wanted to be involved in that, including in the UK. The publicity that was created in the countries where the JPSG went to were not seen as parliamentarians on a tourist trip. In fact, the meetings were very intense, taken very seriously by the countries where we went to. I mean, in Britain, it was also, always an undercurrent of Euroscepticism and so on. But the Brits that attended, including members of the House of Lords and Commons, took it very seriously. And then the decisions were taken very seriously. So there are ways of doing this that can see this body become, important. But there's always a danger that of course it can get sidelined. But I suspect, given what the Partnership Council is going to be like, well, if it carries on like this, the way that it started, then you could get that kind of balance going on. But there are models for this, I think, to make it better.
Great, thanks, Claude. Susanna.
Thank you. No, I clearly I think Claude is absolutely right, and Peter, I think many things really we don't also already actually know very, very, very much about it, and it is still very much in the making. But when that question came about relations within political party families, obviously it is up to the members of that assembly. I mean, there might be also exchange along those lines. Therefore, it is always sort of interesting and good to have these contacts.
Great, thanks, Susanna. We have a good few more questions. One in the Q&A, and please keep them coming. Kenneth Armstrong is asking, Parliaments have been the site for struggle over Brexit, both at UK and devolved levels. How should we have any confidence that the UK government will be at all responsive to an increasing role for parliaments? Who would like to take that on board? That's an important point. Anybody? Yeah, Peter, please.
No, I don't think we can be confident in the British government wanting to take increased notice of Parliament on these things. And going back to an earlier discussion, I worry about the current British government's approach to the devolved administrations, which has certainly not been to consult them fully and carefully. And the whole Internal Market Act is as much about retaining power in Westminster as distributing it to the devolved administrations. So perhaps the PPA is an opportunity for the parliaments to make a stand and include devolved assembly representations in them. But I'm afraid that the parliaments are going to have to shout quite loudly to make sure that their views are heard, and whatever joint view can be formed in a PPA, so that they are heard by governments, and particularly on the British side, which I don't think is particularly minded to take a great deal of attention to parliamentary opinions and views on the way that Brexit is implemented. And there are so many uncertainties, so many things still to be agreed, still to be seen how they operate in practice, that there really is a role for a loud parliamentary voice in the follow-up to the TCA.
Fantastic, thanks, Peter. And Davor. Yeah.
Oops. Thanks. If I may just reinforce what Peter was saying, precisely because there was actually recently a written question to the Cabinet Office posed by a member of the House of Lords, precisely on this question, on the devolved participation in the new PPA in the Assembly. And the question was answered by Penny Mordaunt, and it was very vague and non-committal. So it was a very general approach saying, we will help Parliament to participate, but didn't specify how, when, in which way. So in other words, there is no guarantee. Parliaments will indeed have to shout loud in order to get their points across. So yeah.
Great, thank you very much. There's a question for Claude. Many MPs have expressed concerns that the PPA will become a talking shop. What would you do to make sure that the scrutiny will be effective, and what should be the ultimate goal of the scrutiny to provide accountability and/or influence to shape decisions? That's from Isabella Mancini. Sorry, to Claude.
Yeah, I think I just answered that one in my previous comment. I wanted to answer her. So it was the models that can be used in reference to Peter's comments that that Parliament will have to shout louder, you know, using its soft power, become relevant. But the model I was giving was JPSG, which was recognised by many member state governments as being a real pain in the behind, you know, and dealing with constitutional issues, data protection issues. You know, Europol ended up doing what the JPSG was suggesting, you know, by national parliamentarians and MEPs. So, I mean, the record is there. So, you know, there are structures that can end up making a body like this powerful. But, you know, at the end of the day, Peter is right. You know, at the end of the day, you know, the government taking all this power to its bosom and then keeping it, you know, that struggle is going to be there. But it's a struggle worth having, obviously. But yeah, this is all going to be the danger, but we have to stop making it from the outset, not have it being a talking shop. And I would say I agree with Suzanne in that the European parliamentary side will not want that, of course. I mean, they're very, very raw about this kind of thing, so they will not want that.
Super, thanks so much, Claudia. My Zoom eyesight diminishment. Peter, you want to come in there? Thank you.
I just wanted to speak up for talking shops. I mean, there's nothing wrong with talking shops, and indeed parliaments, you know, in this case, largely are talking shops. I mean, it's not a completely sort of banal point because, as far as I understand it, the PPA has no legislative function. It has no formal powers as part of the legislative process. That is, you know, the sovereign issue for the governments involved, and so it can only be a talking shop. But it can, as Claude says, be a much more effective talking shop by adopting certain models than others. It can't actually have any kind of operational role, as far as I understand it, in how the governments implement the TCA, but it can invoke public opinion, it can invoke public concern, and so there is something to be said for talking shops.
Great, thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Question from, oh, sorry, Susanna, did you want to come in there?
Absolutely, I just wanted to underline that point. And I think if we came to a situation where we have that assembly that has sort of the possibility to get information from the Partnership Council on when it intends to come up with certain measures that will then might create waves, I think creating that publicity and that public debate is already something very, very valuable.
Thank you, Susanna. There's a great question there from Vince Pesco. Should there be a legislative requirement to ensure devolved nations can be represented in the PPA? Would anyone like to come in there? Any thoughts on that? Peter. Okay.
I mean, it's too late to put that into the TCA text, of course. So it is up to how each side defines and constructs its own representation. On the UK side, I guess it is for Parliament to decide that. But of course, in the Commons, you know, the government has a clear majority and presumably would have to bring forward a motion to put in place whatever was agreed. So in the end, we can't escape the fact that the British government will have a say in this. And I'm not sure how enthusiastic they will be, put it like that.
Anybody else on this issue? Davor?
Just to provide a parallel, which answers the question in the same direction, which is the appetite of the current government to change the arrangements under the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act for the scrutiny of treaties. The government isn't really very open to changing the current arrangements, even though there's a lot of appetite in both houses of Parliament. Obviously, the House of Lords has done a great job, I think, so far by Lord Goldsmith in trying to nudge the government to engage in more debates going forward on the ex-ante process preceding the conclusion of international agreements. So I believe it would be hard to pass legislation to that effect, but I think the answer lies really in informal arrangements and commitments that could be extracted from the government rather than the legislative route.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And there's a follow-up question from Vince Pesco as well. Are there any alternative methods open to the devolved assemblies and or governments to take a role in the activities of the PPA? Anything further beyond what you said? Anyone want to add to that? Yeah, well, Peter, then Davor.
Sorry, I mustn't speak too much, but I will say, and I'm sure that for the House of Lords, the European Affairs Committee will want to hear from the devolved assemblies. It has already done a great deal with the Belfast Assembly and is also regularly in touch with the Scottish and Welsh devolved assemblies. So one route in for the devolved assemblies is via the Westminster Parliament, and certainly at the House of Lords end of the Westminster Parliament, there is real determination to give the devolved assemblies a voice in the sort of reports we write, the debates we have.
Great, thanks. Davor.
Thanks, Elaine. There's another aspect to this as well. So if things don't work top down, they might work bottom up. I think it's also up to the devolved legislatures to demonstrate their interest in participation in EU and international affairs as well. So the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament each have a committee that, among other things, deals with European affairs, but the Northern Ireland Assembly does not. So one way to demonstrate interest and engagement in this regard is to actually take action at the devolved level and ask for instruments and channels of participation. This couldn't be another avenue of involving those legislatures.
Fantastic. There's a question in the chat there about what's the likelihood of the European Parliament taking litigation against the UK's adequacy decision, or indeed what's the likelihood of any of the member states holding up or litigating any aspect of the Brexit agreement? Any thoughts on this question? Certainly as the adequacy point, any thoughts on this, because of the very specific place of data, very many detailed references to so many data issues. Anyone like to hop in there on that spicy question?
Maybe I feel duty bound to say something. I mean, obviously I'm in touch with lots of people who are involved still in the committee, who are very concerned about the British government's, what they think was a very quick decision, which was obviously everyone feels was taken for economic reasons, which I think can be understood. But the legal problems still exist. The immigration exemption, the security exemption, they all exist, as you know, Elaine. I mean, you're an expert on this, so you know. My understanding is, you may have a different one, but the member states have indicated they're not going to do anything about that because there's an economic imperative. Data needs to be transferred for economic reasons. We're in the middle of COVID, all the rest of it. But the problem is going to be down the line when clearly, and I think Peter referenced this at some point, where you're not going to erase these legal difficulties in adequacy. Adequacy is there for economic reasons. There's also security issues as well. And, it's an ongoing issue, adequacy. So my concern is not the member states at the moment. I mean, they will go with this. But what happens when there are legal actions further down the line? Because we haven't resolved the root problems, as it were. And the other issue, again, Peter referenced it, was on the question of data. So much of the security package and data protection package was just left alone in the TCA. It just wasn't touched. Therefore, it was just still left to do, and that creates another big problem. So I think the answer to that question is member states will let it go, but we're going to have problems further down the line. So I think that's my initial, short version.
Thanks, Claude. Peter?
Yes, well, I totally agree with what Claude says there. And on the security side, which is the one I know best, there are, of course, separate governance arrangements for data, but they are equally fragile, I would say, as on the economic side. I mean, I've discovered in reading into this, of course, that the UK as a member state had the protection of the national security exemption in the treaty. As a third country, we don't have that. So our national security data handling arrangements are subject to the same strict scrutiny as, for example, was the case with the American data handling, which indeed led to the problems and the Schrems judgments. So Britain is going to find itself held to a high standard, and I think there is a brittleness and an uncertainty about the future on the data issue, on the security side, not even leaving aside on the economic side, which is a matter of concern, because losing the data adequacy arrangements on security could have quite wide implications for sharing across the justice and security area.
Great, thank you. There's another question there. I'll let you all have a think. If you, it's from David Nassler. If the devolved UK parliaments and assemblies are to be in the PPA, should we expect the EP delegation to include parliamentarians from member states such as the Republic of Ireland? Who would anyone have any thoughts on this as our final question? Susanna, would you?
Well, I would just say that, I mean, it is clear, I mean, that it is between the EU, and this is an agreement between the EU and the UK, and on the EU level, it's the European Parliament that is the parliamentary body, and obviously there are lots of very committed members coming from the Republic of Ireland who are members of the European Parliament and who will certainly play a role in that assembly.
Great. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Yeah, Davor.
I mean, Elaine, I wouldn't expect this to happen. Based on my experience of the European Parliament and the way it has established its delegations, over 40 delegations, 5 delegations to interparliamentary assemblies, I wouldn't expect the European Parliament to now all of a sudden start accepting national parliamentarians among their midst so easily, precisely because the European Parliament, at least that comes through from my research, has used some of these assemblies to actually set the agenda and kind of try to decide the topics that will be discussed. So diluting the ability to set that agenda might not be what the European Parliament wants to do.
Thanks so much, Davor. If anyone else wants to jump in, just put up your hand. There's another question there from Bridget Fowler. The TCA doesn't say anything about where the PPA should meet. Is there any binding provision on the EU side that says meetings of such bodies must take place in Brussels when they're being hosted by the EU side? Speaking from past personal experience of trying to encourage MPs to go to such things, destinations other than Brussels might be attractive. And similarly, I can imagine some MPs being attracted by the idea of showcasing their constituencies to visit MEPs. Well, that's a brilliant question. Thank you so much, Bridget. Anyone any thoughts on that?
Well, I hope it's not Strasbourg. I don't know if it's in the text. Is there anything in the text about? No.
No. Should we go Davor then Susanna? And
I think the safest answer for this period is Zoom. It will probably be nowhere. But when it returns to in person, when it's established, I believe it would alternate between Brussels and London. I believe that there would be some sort of alternation between the UK and the EU, because this is what the transatlantic legislators dialogue does. So they alternate between the two continents. So I believe that will be
which gives my theory on the soft power, because I think despite everything, London is another country and a lot of MEPs like London. So I think this is a very positive thing for the PPA. London has survived in its attractiveness.
Susanna, yeah?
Yeah, no, certainly it would alternate between meeting in the UK and in the EU. And for the EU, Brussels is the natural place because also the facilities are there. But, you know, it is not to be excluded that there would be meetings in other places, country of the presidency. So that is part of all those many questions that are still to be defined.
Well, without further ado, I think it's we've come to our end of our conclusions of our natural time slot. But thank you very much to you all for so many very rich discussions about so many issues that are evolving as we speak in such a dynamic framework. And it's been a great pleasure to have you all, but also thank you to so many participants for all of the fantastic questions and to see so many in such good numbers. So thank you very much for joining. It's been lovely to see you. I'm very sorry we can't invite you for a wine reception hour for dinner now, but we'll find out a way to get there at some point. But thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you sometime soon at the Institute for the Study of European Law events. And so thank you very much once again to all of our speakers, and a good evening to you all. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Elaine.
Bye-bye. Thank you.